What is a part of history have you been a part of or witnessed? When I was 5, my parents took me to Cape Canaveral since it was only a 30-minute drive to watch the space shuttle lift off. It was my first one I had ever seen. It was Challenger. Dude. Internet hug. Oklahoma City bombing. On the scene 3 hours after explosion. I was a rescue worker for the Red Cross working there for 4 days. I helped with the bodies, morgue, food, water, debris and pretty much everything else. I had a B permit, I think it was called. It was access to ground zero. It was horrific. It's all I know how to say. For 5-6 blocks in every direction. Not a single building had windows. I saw cars that were blown into a wall adjacent from the blast zone. A few of them were fused together in a twisted metal figure. Blood was everywhere. I've never seen so many grown men bawl. I couldn't stop crying myself. Looking back, it was a mini 9/11. Part of me was glad to have had that experience, but I wonder really if it was the worst thing I could have done. I watched the World Trade Center fall from my classroom in Brooklyn. I was teaching 7th graders at the time and listening to it being broadcast on Hot 97 while watching out my window. When the first one collapsed, at first we didn't understand what was happening because of all of the smoke, but then heard the radio saying the tower is falling. It's coming down. I don't think it's there anymore. The space shuttle as it exploded high in the atmosphere, just saw it cease to have a single trajectory, knew it was not good. My homeroom teacher blew up on the space shuttle, and I stood on 5th Ave and watched the first plane hit on 9/11. I pretty much feel like I don't need any more goddamn history in my life. You had Krista as your homeroom teacher. Wow man. Walked through a tunnel in France once and saw the aftermath of a bad car crash. Then our ferry was delayed for some reason and, once we got back to England, we discovered that we'd seen Princess Diana's car. Hard to feel part of history when you're 5, though. I watched the implosion of the old Canberra hospital, Canberra being the capital city of Australia. Implosion went very wrong and became an explosion. A girl was killed 200 meters from me. Turned out to be my best friend's cousin. Only really history in Australia, and only really known in Canberra. History is fricked. TLDR. Watched an old building get blown up that killed my best mate's cousin. As an Australian, I had never heard of this event before, and I'm from NSW with family in Canberra. Granted, I was only 4 when it actually happened. Was present when the Berlin Wall was brought down. American, and my dad, Chair Force, was stationed in Germany at the time. I still have some really big chunks of it we got that are covered in graffiti. I was there too. Similar situation with my dad being in the military. I was in DC during the sniper attacks. Going out to run errands was terrifying. We would sprint into the grocery store from the car, squat next to my car while pumping gas, and mainly just try to keep these excursions out of the house to a minimum. Everybody was suspicious of white vans but truly had no idea where these gun blasts were coming from. One day while walking out of the post office, a passing car backfired and everyone immediately hit the ground or ducked behind a wall. There were checkpoints set up in differing spots stopping vehicles and questioning occupants. It really was a scary summer. There's a new book called Gone that captures the weird panic of the sniper attacks really well. That was just a crazy time. I remember my parents dragging my 7-year-old butt out of bed. It was 11 PM local time to watch Neil Armstrong walk on the moon on our black and white TV. Did not want. Heck, my parents did something similar when the Berlin Wall went down. I really didn't give any fricks at the time, but in hindsight I'm glad they did. Sometimes our parents actually are correct when they say you'll thank me later. Now shush. I witnessed the last log drive travel down the Ottawa River. I've watched and listened to Fidel Castro deliver a speech in Havana, Cuba, in person. Those are 2 things I clearly remember seeing. I'm sure there is more. I'll post more if I can remember. I saw the miracle of the Hudson. I saw it happening from the New Jersey side. I was looking at the river as the plane landed. Whoa, I would have flipped crap if I saw that. That pilot is amazing. The gasoline shortages of the 1970s. Stations had red and green flags they'd place out front to indicate whether or not they had gas. People were running out all the time. People were getting shot. It was insane. I remember watching TV back around that time when Walter Cronkite, I think, said that gasoline might go as high as $1 a gallon. Parents said that's crazy talk. I saw the Challenger explode. I was walking back from the office to my classroom in junior high, saw this weird flash of light, didn't think anything of it at the time, and about 5 minutes later the announcement was made that the ship had gone up. I don't think up was the direction it went. The last flight of the recently retired space shuttle went directly over the school where I teach. One of the few times I've outright stopped class. The kids crowded by the windows to watch. They were blown away. Truly once in a lifetime. It flew over my school too, but my teacher didn't tell us. I straight up missed it. A bunch of other classes saw it though. Columbine. I was 19, freshman in college. Happened to fly into Denver that morning. I had a few hours to kill, so I drove around the city surrounding area and pulled into the area just as there was a bunch of commotion starting. So I stopped and pulled over, stood behind the police tape. At one point I actually heard one of the students that got out talking on a cell phone to some news show. Heard him say they were referred to as the homosexual trenchcoat mafia. Of course they dropped the homosexual part in subsequent reports. Few hours to kill. I was in Harbin, China on the 7th of May, 1999 when NATO bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, which resulted in the deaths of 3 Chinese reporters and outraged the Chinese public. I was on a study abroad program at Harbin Institute of Technology. They locked us in our dorms that evening because of huge anti-American protests throughout campus and Harbin city. All of us study abroad kids had Chinese roommates, so we thought we were in for some long awkward nights, but all of the Chinese students that lived with us were super classy, very protective of us, and were only concerned about our safety. The other students on campus were not so kind. We were spat on and yelled at on the way to the cafeterias in the weeks following. No violence though. There was a vote if we wanted to end the program early, but we all decided to stay. I watched Bud Dwyer shoot himself on television the day it happened. I thought it was live, but doing a little research on it leads me to believe I just happened to catch one of the stories that day that didn't edit the footage. I was 5 or 6 at the time and my mother was watching the news conference he had called. She was glued to the TV when he pulled out the gun, but she was trying unsuccessfully to keep me from watching as well. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that my mother was all worked up and didn't want me to see the TV, so I wanted to see the TV. I was in the streets when the second plane hit, and when the first tower fell, ran for my life and didn't stay to watch second tower fall. Like I said in a comment above, my favorite pair of sneakers got covered in ground zero dust. I never wore them again. I was a part of the Egyptian Revolution last year. That was definitely a big event for me. Very bug. Friends and friends of mine barely made it over the 35W bridge collapse in Minneapolis, MN. My aunt and her SO were just minutes over the bridge, and my brother's good friend was the last one to drive over the bridge without getting hurt. It was horrible, waiting to hear back from my aunt to see if she was alright when we watched on the TV as cars were turned over in the river, knowing people were dying right in front of us. I would have never thought that something of that caliber would happen in MN, let alone to people I care about. LA riots, 1992. Uncle's video store burned and gutted in Quarrytown. Everyone huddled around the radio, Korean station based in LA, trying to hear updates about their stores up north. Nothing is more horrible than hearing a bunch of first-generation immigrant adult men cry inconsolably on air after learning their store, their entire livelihood that they've worked so hard for, was looted and burned to the ground. The American dream died that week. Looters are buttholes. There is no excuse for such behavior. I lived in Iraq during the Iraq-Iran War and later the Gulf War. I witnessed the bombing of Mosul from about 4 miles away, atop the roofs of our ancestral village, where our family was taking refuge during the war. From the point of view of a 6-year-old child, the bombing, the anti-air gunfire streaking through the night sky and the bombing siren ringing in the distance seemed really beautiful. Whoa, thanks for posting this. I wish more people in these comments were able to convey their experience as well as you did. Will end up as a minor footnote in a subpar history book. but I went to Woodstock 99, saw some cars flipped, fires started, fences torn down, the beginning of the riots, and fleas wang. It was not a good time. That's not the Woodstock way. My flight from JFK to Shanghai last Friday was rerouted and grounded due to the Chinese Shenzhou 9 launch, which sent the first Chinese woman to space. It would have been just peachy if they hadn't landed our Airbus A340 in Biti Regional Airport in the middle of bumfuck northeast China, which didn't have a vehicle capable of backing the plane out of its parking spot on the tarmac and onto the runway. We waited in the plane for 10 hours after a 12-hour flight while they flew in a new tow bar from another airport. I actually felt like a real butthole for complaining every time the co-pilot came on the intercom and thanked us for our patience during this glorious moment in history for the Chinese people. I was in downtown LA when the Rodney King verdict broke. A black friend of mine took me to his family's house where I could hang out. People were in and out the whole time, including a couple of members of the Crips gang. Somebody brought in a bunch of presumably stolen electronics and kitchen appliances. There were a few heated arguments about my presence there. They drove me out of there at 3 AM, hiding underneath covers in the backseat of their car. Pretty scary, but also fascinating. Blackout of 2003. Also, dawn of the internet. I was alive long enough before the mid-90s to get a taste of how things are. In the late 90s the internet culture was still mostly geek domain, something only dabbled in by average people. Between 2000 and 2010 it became a first world necessity. It's incredible now, and the continuingly encroaching impact revolution on our lives is amazing to watch. I like to reflect on this because we're stuck between ages of exploring the planet and exploring the cosmos. We missed the boat on exploring the world and we're too soon from spaceplanes and starships and pew pew. So, our frontier is a virtual one. Our adventure is social and digital. That was such a great day, the blackout. All the kids went outside to play around and the sky looked gorgeous that night. Such a small event, but I'll remember it always. I partook in the consumption of the world's largest root beer float, an event put on by A&W Root Beer for what I believe was their 80th anniversary, in my hometown of Lodi. That crap was so cash. All I can think is backwash. 9/11. My mom was in the Pentagon when it was hit. She was supposed to brief General Maud. She was 10 minutes late for that briefing. Thank God, because the plane has General Maud's office. He was a good man. I also had to go drive her car out of the lot once it was released to be picked up. She was tasked with trying to contact everyone in the office to find out who was alive or dead. Because that was her job, she had to tell a lot of wives their husbands wouldn't be coming home. 34 people in her office died. She had PTSD for a long time. Because I saw what terrorism did to her and her organization, that eventually factored heavily into my decision to become a US Army interrogator. I feel so sorry for your mother. I would hate to tell someone that someone important to them passed away. The first time an American president visited Denmark, I was there. I watched as the row of cars and ambulances and police bikes and whatnot drove through the part of the city I was in. I waved at the limo S, and just as the second limo passed me, I saw Clinton move forwards and wave back to me. I was the only one standing right there, not sure if it counts. Oh, an American president. That makes more sense. I watched Space Shuttle Columbia burn up over where I lived during re-entry. Well, not actually watched it happen live. We saw the footage as it was happening over our heads. Later in the evening we found bits of metal and debris in the woods behind my friend's subdivision, and we went back home to tell his mom, who called the cops. Wish I had saved even a small chunk, but we were too afraid of space disease. We were in 8th grade and just finished reading Andromeda Strain. But still, it was crazy cool when they showed up to clean it up. I went to the White House the night that Osama bin Laden was killed. It was wild, like a combination of the 4th of July and your team winning the Super Bowl. I found the reaction to his death strange. I understand that he was an evil man, but the way people actively celebrated the death of another human being just doesn't sit right with me. I was at the Del Taco across the street from the hospital where Optimum gave birth. Didn't know what happened until after, but there were reporters everywhere. Grew up with Matthew Shepard. I was working 2 doors down when he was lured out of the bar by the buttholes who beat him, tied him to a fence and left him to die. I also lived in Laramie during media onslaught and went to his funeral in Casper, that was picketed by Westboro Baptist Church. Oh god, I remember this case. That poor kid. Frick the WBC. I saw the second plane hit the WTC from my building's roof just across the river, and saw the buildings fall from there as well. It happened to be just 1 month after I was laid off a job on the 63rd floor of the South Tower. Till. Bucharest, Romania 1989 to 1990. I was about 5. My parents came and picked me up from school and said we got to get as far away from downtown as possible. By the time we got home to pack, people were getting dragged, beaten and killed around us. We managed to get away with damage to the vehicle, but seeing young people fight for real freedom, as real as it gets in a revolution, changed me as young as I was, and I'm glad I saw it. Unfortunately, as all revolutions, it stops halfway when the new people seize power. I've only seen the sky turn blood red twice in my life. Once was when I was 14 and there was a solar eclipse. The other was the explosion of the government armory, which contained bombs, in Lagos, Nigeria around 2001. I thought I was going to die that day. So much panic and screaming and tremors every time another one went off. And the fire. That was the worst part. Many people who lived close to the site died that day because they ran in panic and drowned in a nearby river. Others just got in car accidents trying to escape. Nobody knew what was happening. In the end, about 2,000 people died. The 3 hurricanes that hit Florida in 2004. Charlie removed my roof after it dropped a tornado on our house. Also took out all 7 of our trees. Not a fun evening. Francis and Jan did less damage, just left us without power for a couple of weeks. However, Francis did a bunch of damage to my uncle's house, so in the middle of the storm we had to drive over and rescue him and his dogs before they got drenched. Took him a year to repair everything. Interesting summer. I remember that summer very well. I was in St. Petersburg. We didn't get much damage, but the surf was amazing and the winds were gnarly. IDK of history, but I was at the X Games when Travis Pastrana did the double backflip and basically halted motocross trick progression. As a kid, my first basketball game that I was taken to, it was an exhibition game featuring Air Jordan himself during the time that he was playing baseball. This was the off season before he came back. It was also the last game in the old Bulls arena. Jordan not only tore it up but went out at the end of the game and kissed the half-court logo. It was a cool moment for me to see that much greatness and is probably what made me a basketball fan for life. 2010 state of emergency in Kingston, Jamaica. Dudas Coke's gunman at war with the police force. The official death toll is listed in the high 70s, but it's well known in Kingston that the death toll was much higher but was suppressed by Kingston police. Took part, as a white teenager, in several illegal, and a few legal ones after laws changed on a lot of things. Anti-apartheid marches and joined the ECC, End Conscription campaign, whilst still at school. I was somewhat of a social pariah for my last years at school. I live in downtown Toronto, and went to high school in even more downtown Toronto. During the G20 madness, I graduated. When I got off at the school's nearest subway station, police were searching youth's bags. They didn't search me because I was all dapper for graduation, but yeah, that was freaky. Oh man, I remember that. The crap was insane. I was in front of the White House the night Obama won the election. I've never seen so many people so happy and don't know if I ever will again. People were dancing in the streets and standing on top of each other's shoulders in the middle of the mob. Random people would hug you and kiss you. Some people were crying with happiness. I saw people form an impromptu brass band and play down the street. You could hear the singing of na 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 hey 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 goodbye from blocks away, along with chantings of we did it. I don't care who you voted for. That was beautiful. Chantings of we did it. I can only think of Dora. I was born in 1991 in Bosnia. We fled to Croatia and later on to Holland. Guess that means I was part of the war even though I don't remember much. Our house was burned by our Muslim friends' neighbors because we were Catholic. War really fricks things up and makes people do horrible things. Born in 1991 in Bosnia as well. We fled to Hungary though, then here to Canada. My family had similar bad experiences, mostly with Serbs because we were Muslim. I feel you though. I have no photos of me before the age of 7 because we had to leave everything behind. This is kind of lame, but I think it is really interesting. I went to a Catholic elementary in middle school when Pope John Paul II died and they began the process of electing a new pope. That is all we watched in my classes. It was either 6th or 7th grade, so we easily could have been learning something. I distinctly remember my English teacher not giving us our spelling test for 3 days, and all 3 days we watched TV coverage from the Vatican. Finally, after a few days of this, the white smoke appeared and the new pope had been elected. My English teacher started crying. Another teacher came in, she was crying. All the kids in my class didn't really that much. We just found it funny that teachers were crying. I look back on this now and think, why the frick did my parents send me there? You could have been learning that it actually could have, not could have. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.